Hello, my dear friends. My name is Margaret. I'm 78 years old, and I'm a great-grandmother to 6 beautiful babies. Come sit here with me, because I need to tell you a story that will shake you to your very core. If you could please like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, I'd be so grateful. This story, well, it changed everything I thought I knew about my life. It was March 1995. I had been married for 52 years to my husband Harold. 52 years, sweethearts. We married in 1943, right before he shipped out to the Pacific. I was 21, he was 23. And I thought we had the kind of love that romance novels are written about. But sometimes, my children, the people we trust most, are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. And sometimes, the truth has a way of coming out at the most devastating moment possible. Harold had just passed away from a heart attack. I was preparing for his funeral, surrounded by our 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and those 6 precious great-grandbabies. I thought I was saying goodbye to my beloved husband of over 5 decades. I had no idea I was about to discover that the man I buried was a complete stranger. Asterisk, let me paint you a picture of our life. Sweethearts, in 1943, when Harold came back from the war, we bought our first little house on Maple Street for $3,200. Can you imagine? $3,200? Harold was making $45 a week at the telephone company. And I was so proud of him in his crisp white shirt and tie every morning. Our first baby, Robert, came in 1945, then Patricia in 1947, Susan in 1950, and our youngest, Michael, in 1953. 4 beautiful children in that little 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. We made it work with so much love that Harold was, well, I thought he was perfect. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, I'd have his coffee ready, black, 2 sugars, and his lunch packed in that old metal lunchbox. Every evening at 5:45, I'd hear his key in the door, and he'd call out, "Margaret, I'm home," and kiss my cheek. We had our routines, our traditions. Sunday church at First Methodist, followed by pot roast dinner with my mother. Summer vacations to Lake Michigan, where Harold would teach the children to fish. Christmas mornings with the children tearing into presents while I made pancakes. Harold was a provider, a steady man. Never raised his voice, never drank too much, always brought his paycheck straight home to me. When neighbors would complain about their husbands, I'd think how blessed I was, Margaret. He'd say to me every night before bed, "You're the only woman for me," and I believed him with every fiber of my being. But you know what I learned, my dear friends? Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in the most beautiful packaging. Asterisk now. Looking back with the wisdom of years, I can see the signs. But back then, I was such a trusting soul. I saw what I wanted to see. It started small. You understand, little things that didn't quite add up. Harold began working overtime more frequently. In the 1970s, when the children were teenagers, he'd come home later and later. Big project at the phone company. He'd say, "They need their best men on this." I was proud of his dedication, proud that his bosses relied on him. When he missed Robert's high school graduation for emergency work, I made excuses. When he couldn't attend Patricia's wedding rehearsal dinner, I smiled and told everyone how important his job was. There were these business trips too. Starting in the late 1960s, Harold would travel to train new employees in different cities. Springfield, Peoria, sometimes as far as St. Louis. He'd be gone for 4 days at a time. "Margaret," he'd say, "I hate leaving you, but this promotion depends on it." And I'd pack his suitcase with such care, making sure he had clean shirts and his favorite aftershave. Then there were the phone calls. Starting around 1975, our phone would ring at odd hours. When I'd answer, there'd be silence, then a click. "Wrong numbers," Harold would say. "Happens all the time." But the strangest thing, my sweethearts, was Harold's new interests. He started buying cologne I'd never seen before, started caring about his appearance in ways he never had. New shirts, nicer ties, even started going to an actual barber, instead of letting me trim his hair. "Harold," I said one day, "you're looking awfully handsome these days." He just laughed and said, "Can't a man want to look good for his wife?" I should have known, deep in my heart, I should have known. But love makes us blind, doesn't it? We see what we want to see, believe what we need to believe. The saddest part, I spent those years trying to be a better wife, thinking that if he was working so hard, I needed to work harder too. I learned new recipes, kept the house spotless, never complained about his absences. I was fighting a war I didn't even know I was in. Asterisk. March 15th, 1995. The day I buried my husband of 52 years. The day my entire life revealed itself to be a lie. The funeral home was packed. My children, Harold had touched so many lives, I thought. Co-workers from the telephone company, neighbors from 5 decades on Maple Street, church members, old army buddies. I sat in the front pew in my black dress, the same dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral 2 years prior. I was holding our youngest granddaughter, little Amy, when I noticed a woman I didn't recognize. She was probably in her late 60s, well-dressed, sitting 3 rows back. She was crying harder than anyone else in that church. But what struck me wasn't her tears. It was the way she was looking at Harold's casket, like her heart was breaking, like she was losing the love of her life. After the service, as people were offering condolences, this woman approached me. Her name was Dorothy. Dorothy Henderson, Mrs. Williams. She said, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry for your loss." There was something in her eyes, sweethearts. Something that made my stomach turn. "Did you know Harold from work?" I asked politely. Her face went white. "In a way," she whispered. Then she looked around nervously and said, "Mrs. Williams, could we speak privately?" My daughter Patricia saw my confused expression and came over. "Mom, is everything all right?" Dorothy looked at Patricia, then back at me. I think I need to tell you something. About Harold. About our relationship. My dear friends, you know that feeling when your blood turns to ice? When your heart stops beating for just a moment? That's what happened to me in that funeral home lobby, surrounded by flowers and sympathy cards. "What kind of relationship?" Patricia asked, her voice sharp. Dorothy started crying again. "Harold and we were together for 25 years. We had an apartment together on Lincoln Avenue, he told me. He told me you knew. He said you'd agreed to separate living arrangements, but stayed married for the children's sake." The world stopped spinning. My children. Everything went silent except for the sound of my heart breaking into a million pieces. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Harold comes home every night. We sleep in the same bed. We, single quotes, not every night," Dorothy said softly. "He stayed with me Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. And most weekends when he told you he was traveling for work." I couldn't breathe. Patricia was holding my arm, and I could hear her saying, "This woman is clearly confused, Mom." But I knew suddenly, I knew she was telling the truth. 20-5 years. The business trips, the overtime, the new clothes, the cologne, the phone calls. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was Harold, but not the Harold I knew. He was laughing, his arm around Dorothy, standing in front of a cottage I'd never seen. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, "Dorothy and me, summer 1983, my other life, my real happiness, my real happiness." Those words echoed in my mind as I stared at that photograph. My real happiness. As if our 52 years together, our 4 children, our grandchildren, our life, as if none of it was real. As if it was all just an obligation. Asterisk. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life, my sweethearts. Harder than childbirth, harder than losing my parents, harder even than watching Harold's health decline. Because everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. Dorothy and I met again the following week. I needed to know everything. Every horrible, painful detail. She told me about their apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom on Lincoln Avenue, just 8 miles from our house. Harold had told her he was separated from me, that we lived like roommates for the sake of appearances. "He showed me pictures of you," Dorothy said, "and this broke my heart in a new way. He said you were a wonderful mother, but that the love had died years ago. He said you both agreed it was better this way." She showed me more photographs. Harold at Christmas parties I thought he was missing for work. Harold on vacation trips I knew nothing about. Harold with Dorothy's family, her children, her grandchildren, playing the role of grandfather to children who weren't even his. He gave me this ring for our 20th anniversary, Dorothy said, showing me a beautiful emerald ring I'd never seen. 20 years, my children. 20 years of anniversaries with another woman, while I celebrated the same years with him. But the cruelest part, Dorothy told me about how Harold would complain about me. How I was set in my ways, how I didn't understand him. How he felt trapped in our marriage. The man who told me every night that I was the only woman for him was telling another woman that I was the burden he couldn't escape. I went home that day and looked through everything with new eyes. His dresser drawers, his papers, his wallet, everything he'd left behind. And there it was, evidence everywhere. Credit card statements for purchases I'd never seen. Hotel receipts from towns he'd never mentioned visiting. A second car insurance policy for a car I didn't know he owned. In his briefcase I found a small address book. Dorothy's information was there, along with other women's names and numbers. Other women, my children. How many lies were there? But the worst discovery came last. Hidden in the bottom of his toolbox in the garage, I found love letters. Dozens of them, spanning decades, not just from Dorothy, but from other women too. One letter, dated 1978, made me physically ill. A woman named Linda wrote, "Harold, I can't keep being your Tuesday girl while you play house with your wife. Either leave her or lose me, Tuesday girl." I was making his dinner every Tuesday night, while he was with his Tuesday girl. In that moment, sitting in my garage surrounded by evidence of his betrayals, I realized something important. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I was going to let it transform me. For 52 years, I had been Margaret Williams, Harold's devoted wife. But Harold Williams had been a lie. So who was I going to be now? Asterisk, my dear friends, there's a moment in every woman's life when she discovers her own backbone. Mine happened at 76 years old, sitting in that garage, surrounded by evidence of a lifetime of lies. I could have crawled into bed and never gotten up. Lord knows, part of me wanted to. But my grandmother's voice came to me. She used to say, "Margaret, honey, you're made of stronger stuff than you know. When life knocks you down, you get up swinging." So that's exactly what I did. First, I needed to know the extent of Harold's deceptions. I hired a private investigator, a lovely young woman named Jennifer who specialized in these kinds of cases. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "I'm going to find everything. Are you prepared for what we might discover?" "Honey," I told her, "I've already discovered my husband of 52 years was a stranger. How much worse could it get?" "Well, it could get much worse." Jennifer's investigation revealed that Harold had been living essentially two complete lives. The apartment with Dorothy was fully furnished, with his clothes, his belongings, even photographs of his family, Dorothy's children and grandchildren. But Dorothy wasn't the only one. Over the years, there had been at least 4 other long-term relationships. Harold was what Jennifer called a compartmentalized cheater. He kept each part of his life completely separate. The financial betrayal was staggering. Harold had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for decades to support his other life. That apartment rent, gifts for Dorothy, vacations I never knew about, all paid for with money I thought was going into our retirement savings. Jennifer estimated that over 25 years, Harold had stolen nearly $200,000 from our family. Money that should have secured our future, gone to fund his selfish double life. But here's what made me angriest. My children. It wasn't just about me. Harold had missed important moments with our children and grandchildren because he was playing house with other families. Robert's college graduation, Patricia's difficult pregnancy with her first child, Susan's divorce when she needed her father most. Every time our family needed him, Harold chose his other life instead. As I learned more, my sadness transformed into something much more powerful, determination. Harold was gone, so I couldn't confront him. But I could reclaim my truth. I could make sure the world knew who he really was. And most importantly, I could make sure Dorothy and the others learned the truth about the man they thought they loved. Because you see, sweethearts, Harold hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed them too. They thought they were his true loves, his real life. But the truth was, none of us were real to him. We were all just ... conveniences. I spent 3 months planning my response. Not revenge. Mind you, justice. There's a difference. Asterisk 6. Months after Harold's funeral, I hosted what I called a truth gathering at our house on Maple Street. I invited Dorothy, 2 of Harold's other women that Jennifer had tracked down, his co-workers who had covered for him, and even some of our mutual friends who I suspected had known about his double life. I also invited all 4 of our children and their families. They deserved to know who their father really was. The living room where Harold and I had celebrated 52 Christmases was packed with people who had been touched by his lies. I served coffee and cake, just like any other gathering. Invited you all here, I began, because we've all been living with a lie. Harold Williams wasn't the man any of us thought he was. I laid out everything on the coffee table. The photographs, the receipts, the love letters, the financial records. Evidence of a lifetime of systematic deception. Dorothy turned white when she saw letters from other women. Harold told me I was the only one, she whispered. He told me the same thing, said Linda, one of the other women. My son Robert was furious. Dad missed my graduation because he said he had to work. But according to this, he held up a receipt. He was in Florida with this woman. One by one, we all shared our pieces of the Harold puzzle. And what emerged wasn't a man living a double life, it was a man living multiple lives, telling each woman exactly what she needed to hear to keep her hooked. Harold's coworker Frank finally spoke up. Margaret, I'm ashamed to say, we all knew. Harold bragged about having the best of both worlds. He said you were the perfect homemaker and Dorothy was the perfect girlfriend, the perfect homemaker. After 52 years of marriage, that's how my husband described me to his friends, a convenient housekeeper. But here's what happened next. My dear friends, and this is why I'm telling you this story. One by one, these women, Dorothy, Linda, the others, they apologized to me, Mrs. Williams. Dorothy said through tears, I thought you knew. I thought you didn't care. I'm so sorry. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. We weren't enemies. We were all victims of the same selfish man. We were all women who had loved and been betrayed. Dorothy and I actually became friends after that day. She moved away from the apartment she'd shared with Harold and started a new life. Linda went back to school at 68 and became a counselor for women dealing with infidelity. As for Harold's legacy, well, let's just say that when people in our community remember Harold Williams now, they don't remember the devoted husband and father. They remember the man who betrayed everyone who loved him. His name was quietly removed from the church memorial board. His co-workers stopped telling Harold stories. Even his grandchildren learned the truth, and they made their own decisions about how to remember their grandfather. Sometimes, my children, the best revenge is simply the truth. Today, at 78 years old, I can tell you that discovering Harold's betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and also the best, because for the first time in my adult life, I learned who Margaret was when she wasn't trying to be Mrs. Harold Williams. I sold that house on Maple Street and bought a lovely little condo near my daughter Patricia. I travel now real trips, not the imaginary ones Harold told me he was taking. I've seen the Grand Canyon, visited my grandson in California, even took a cruise to Alaska. I learned to drive on the highway at 76. Can you imagine? Harold always said city driving was too dangerous for me. Turns out, I'm quite capable of taking care of myself. I volunteer at a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse, because I learned something important. Betrayal is abuse. Lying to someone for decades about who you are, stealing their money, stealing their time, stealing their reality, that's abuse. And I want women to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Dorothy and I meet for coffee once a month. We laugh now about how Harold managed to fool 2 intelligent women for so long. We've become the friends we might have been if he hadn't kept us apart with lies. My children have healed too. They're angry at their father, yes, but they're proud of their mother. Mom, my son Michael said recently, watching you handle this with such grace taught me more about strength than Dad ever did. So my message to you, my dear friends, especially those of you who might be living with suspicions, who might be ignoring red flags, who might be making excuses for behavior that doesn't feel right. Trust your instincts. Love shouldn't require you to ignore your intelligence. And if you're older, like me, and you think it's too late to start over, it's not. I've had 3 of the best years of my life since Harold died. Not because he's gone, but because the lies are gone. I sleep peacefully now. I don't wonder where he really is or what he's really thinking. I don't have to pretend his stories make sense. I'm 78 years old, and for the first time in decades, I'm completely free. Thank you for listening to my story, sweethearts. Please share it with anyone who might need to hear it. And remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than the liars in your life want you to believe. Until next time, this is Margaret, sending you all my love.